2 days after I was abruptly fired from my position as Chief Technology Officer at Synergenics Innovations, I received an email that felt like a punchline to a particularly cruel joke. It came in at 12:08 a.m., time-stamped like some ominous marker, as if the late hour might soften the blow or somehow make the message seem more thoughtful, more weighed. It wasn't. It was cold, calculated, dressed up in corporate language that tried far too hard to sound neutral. But nothing about it was neutral, because it came from Addison Clark, my wife of 9 years, and the CEO who had just signed off on my termination. I read it 3 times, slowly. The wording was all too familiar, filled with HR-filtered nonsense like a decision the board did not take lightly, and in light of recent developments, we are revisiting the matter. As if this had been some impersonal business move, just a shuffling of pieces on a board. But I knew better. I had built Synergenics from the ground up, back when it was just a 2-person dream in our garage, a messy whiteboard full of caffeine-fueled ideas, and a server rack held together by hope and zip ties. Madison had the vision, sure, but I had written the code that turned the vision into a product, and the product into profit. Without me, Synergenics was just another startup with a glossy pitch deck and no real infrastructure. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal, intimate, surgical in its precision. Madison hadn't even had the decency to call me herself. I've been notified by a junior HR rep who could barely look me in the eye, stammering through some script about restructuring and new leadership directions. They even had security escort me out, like I was some kind of threat to the damn building I helped design. And now, 2 days later, Madison sends me a midnight email pretending like this was all just a misunderstanding. That maybe, just maybe, the board had been a bit hasty, and wouldn't it be nice if we could all just pretend none of it happened? I stared at the screen for a long time. My office, my former office, was still half full of my stuff. I hadn't even gone back to get it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I could picture my desk, my mechanical keyboard with the custom keycaps, the framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Santorini, smiling, sunburnt, stupidly in love, and suddenly it felt like all of it had happened to someone else. Someone dumber. Someone who hadn't seen this coming. I thought back to the past year, all the signs I had ignored. The late-night strategy call she didn't want me in. The sudden change in tone when I questioned budget decisions. The way she'd started introducing me at investor dinners as one of our founding team, instead of my husband. It had all been building to this. I just didn't want to see it. Maybe I believed that building a company together was the same as building a life together. That the long nights and shared stress and whispered conversations about the future meant we were partners in the truest sense. But Madison had always been better at compartmentalizing. Business was business. And apparently, marriage was negotiable when stock options were on the line. So I opened a new reply. No overthinking. No diplomacy. Just 4 words that said everything I needed to say. Not happening. I'm done. I hit send without reading it over. Then I closed the laptop, sat back in the dark, and listened to the faint hum of silence that followed. It didn't feel like victory, but it sure as hell felt like freedom. I wasn't blindsided. Not even close. The email, the termination, the whole charade. I'd seen it coming months before it happened. Madison thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers, but the truth was, I had already moved 6 pieces ahead before she ever reached for the first. For the past 6 months, while she was busy polishing her public image and parading around venture capital circles, I'd been quietly building a counterattack she never saw coming. Every investor dinner she hosted, every interview she gave about Synergenics' supposed future, I let her bask in the spotlight while I laid the groundwork in the shadows. It started with whispers, subtle tension in the boardroom, a skipped meeting here, an unusual budget cut there. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I started preparing. Madison thought her biggest advantage was the element of surprise, but I had something better, time, and I used every hour of it. While she undermined my authority in meetings and redirected development funds to vanity projects that looked good on paper but produced nothing of substance, I focused on what mattered. I poured everything into the platform she had ordered us to scrap. Project Halia, Hyper-Adaptive Learning Intelligence Architecture. She claimed it was too ambitious, too abstract, not investor-ready. What she meant was it was too far out of her depth. So I took it with me, quietly, carefully. I restructured the codebase under a different name, removed any trace of Synergenics' proprietary structure, rebuilt the core in my own time, on my own servers, using my own money. I'd spend entire nights hunched over my desk, rewriting lines, testing algorithms, pushing the architecture beyond anything we had originally envisioned. And it worked, better than I'd ever hoped. What Madison had tossed aside as a risk was now a fully operational AI analytics engine that outperformed anything on the market in both speed and accuracy. She had thrown away gold. I just picked it back up and forged it into a weapon. But that was only half of it. The real strength of a system isn't in its code. It's in the people who build and maintain it. That's where I focus next. Quiet conversations. Late-night Zoom calls under the radar. A message here, a question there. I never asked anyone to jump ship. I didn't need to. They saw what was happening. They felt the shift, the way innovation had stalled, how decisions were being made for politics, not progress. Madison had surrounded herself with yes men, and the real talent felt it. Over time, trust began to shift. Loyalty changed direction. And when the time came, I had 23 of Synergenics's best engineers, systems architects, machine learning leads, backend devs, infrastructure experts, ready to follow me wherever I went. And I gave them somewhere to go. While Madison was buying overpriced wine and boasting about her leadership to Forbes, I secured my next move. Nova Core Systems, Synergenics's oldest and most formidable competitor, had been circling the waters for years. They'd always had strong infrastructure, but weak vision. I gave them both. I walked into that boardroom with a working prototype, performance benchmarks, and a migration strategy that would make their CTO obsolete within a quarter. They didn't hesitate. The offer came in less than 24 hours. Full autonomy, full budget control, full leadership. CEO. So while Madison sent me that cold, late-night email asking if I'd consider rejoining Synergenics, I was already standing at the helm of the one company that could gut her from the inside out. I didn't even need revenge. All I had to do was execute the plan I'd spent half a year building. She thought she cut me out. She had no idea I'd already stepped out. The beginning of the end didn't come in a dramatic moment. It wasn't a shouting match, a confrontation, or a single betrayal that knocked the wind out of me. It was quieter than that. Subtle. 18 months ago, things between Madison and me started to shift in ways I couldn't quite name at first. She became distant, not just at home, but in the office, detached in meetings, dismissive in conversation, short in tone. At first, I chalked it up to stress. We were in the middle of a crucial growth phase, expanding aggressively into enterprise analytics. Tensions ran high, and leadership bore the brunt of it. But over time, her behavior began to change in ways that couldn't be explained away by workload. Late nights became routine. Madison always had some vague justification: client dinners, investor calls, strategy sessions that didn't need me. But it wasn't just the hours she kept. It was the way she started guarding her calendar. Password-protected documents that used to be open between us were suddenly off-limits. I'd ask about a trip to New York she took last minute, and she'd get defensive, as if I'd crossed some boundary by even asking. At home, she wasn't just tired. She was absent, even when she was sitting across the room. Conversation turned transactional. Intimacy disappeared completely. And when I pressed, she'd give me this look like I was being paranoid. I wasn't. Something deep in my gut told me this wasn't just burnout or professional fatigue. Something else was happening behind closed doors, and it didn't take long for me to find out what. The truth came out the way these things usually do, not in some cinematic discovery, but in fragments. A stray email on a shared tablet. A hotel reservation under her name that didn't match her travel claims. Receipts. It didn't take long to connect the dots, and when I did, the name that kept coming up made my blood run cold. Carter Reynolds. Carter was a consultant we'd brought on during a leadership restructure. He was supposed to be temporary, a strategic advisor with a clean resume and a reputation for optimizing executive teams. He came in smiling, shook hands with everyone, gave polished talks about efficiency and scale. I'd listened to his input in meetings. I'd even sat beside him during early roadmap sessions, thinking we were collaborating. Meanwhile, he was sleeping with my wife. The betrayal was layered and complete. Madison hadn't just broken her vows. She'd weaponized her position to rewrite the company around him. Every suggestion he made carried a hidden agenda. Every decision that seemed to move us in a new direction had a single goal: phasing me out. Projects I had spearheaded were systematically shelved. Initiatives I pitched were shot down with sudden, unexplained board votes. I wasn't just being pushed aside. I was being erased. Bit by bit, my influence was diluted until the company I had co-founded was no longer mine in any sense of the word. It was Carter behind it. But Madison let it happen. Worse, she directed it. Together, they turned Synergenics into something unrecognizable, a cold machine powered by politics and personal betrayal. And I was left sitting in meetings watching it unfold in real time, pretending I didn't know, while every part of me boiled with a quiet, controlled fury. There was no confrontation, no dramatic fallout, just a slow, surgical betrayal that gutted both my marriage and my legacy, one board vote at a time. Once I knew something was deeply wrong, suspicion wasn't enough. I needed proof, not just for myself, but for what I knew was coming. Trust was already dead between Madison and me, but I refused to let her rewrite the story when the time came. So I did what she never expected. I hired a private investigator. Not just any amateur with a camera and a long lens, either. I reached out to a former FBI agent named Alan Greaves, a man with 30 years of experience dismantling lies for a living. Within days, he had turned my vague suspicions into something sharp, something solid. The first report came back in under a week. I remember sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the folder he delivered like it might catch fire in my hands. It was thicker than I anticipated. Printed records, flash drives, photographs, even GPS data. No speculation. Just facts. Cold, unforgiving, undeniable facts. There were hotel receipts, not just one or two, but a sequence of them, carefully spaced across cities where Madison claimed she was meeting partners or attending tech conferences. Always the same check-in name. Always within blocks of where Carter Reynolds happened to be consulting at the time. The timestamps lined up perfectly with her stories, except they told a completely different one. Then there were the messages, private exchanges between Madison and Carter that left no room for interpretation. Alan had pulled them from deleted backups on an old iCloud account she hadn't realized was still synced to his secondary device. The messages ranged from casual to intimate, flirtatious to vulgar, but the worst of them weren't about sex. They were about me. Direct references to neutralizing Eric's influence on the board. Conversations about timing the separation, so it didn't affect her stock options. Carter advising her on what assets to transfer early to minimize exposure during the divorce. They were already planning it. Behind my back. While we were still eating dinner together. While she was still lying in bed beside me, pretending to be tired from work. The final blow came in the form of an email chain titled Exit Timeline. Carter had outlined a 3-month process. Start by questioning my decisions in board meetings to create a paper trail of concerns, shift project control to department heads loyal to Madison, then stage a vote of no confidence under the guise of structural change. Madison replied in full agreement, attaching an internal memo draft suggesting I take extended leave for health and stress-related concerns. That was weeks before HR ever contacted me, before I ever saw the writing on the wall. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. That moment didn't break me. It clarified everything. I saw it all clearly for the first time. This wasn't a falling out or a personal rift. This was premeditated, weaponized betrayal. Madison had taken the company we built together and used it as a tool to destroy me, and she'd done it methodically, clinically, like a hostile takeover of a person's life. But if she thought I would go quietly, she had misunderstood everything about me. That folder didn't mark the end of my story. It marked the beginning of my mission. I wouldn't play defense. I had spent months preparing for war. Now, I finally knew who my enemy really was. It didn't happen overnight. What looked like a coordinated act of rebellion was actually the result of months of quiet, deliberate groundwork. I didn't approach anyone hastily, and I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. I knew the risks, not just for me, but for them. These weren't interns or disgruntled employees looking for an easy exit. These were the people who built the actual bones of Synergenics. Senior architects, machine learning specialists, security leads, people who had bled into their work, same as I had, and who had watched the company rot from the inside out while being told to smile through it. The first conversation was with Owen Patel. He had been with Synergenics almost as long as I had, our lead data infrastructure engineer, and one of the few voices of reason left in a boardroom that had become increasingly political and performative. We met off the clock, over drinks, and I laid it out with no spin. I told him I was leaving, that I wasn't just walking away, I was rebuilding, elsewhere. I showed him the prototype of Halia, explained how far I had taken it since the board killed it, and what I intended to do with it now. I told him I didn't expect anything, just that I respected him enough not to pretend. He asked one question, who else knows? I said no one. He took a long drink, looked down at the table, and then nodded. Let me know when it's time, he said. That's when I knew this wouldn't be a solo act. One by one, the others followed. Not through pressure, not with flashy offers, just truth. I gave them what Madison never could, transparency and trust. They saw the cracks, the way decisions were made behind closed doors, the way innovation had stalled, how the core culture we built had been traded in for optics and sound bites. And most of them already felt disposable. I simply confirmed what they had suspected all along. Synergenics was no longer Synergenics. It was Madison's trophy, a gleaming shell propped up by broken promises and market positioning. The mission was dead, and we were done. By the time her midnight email landed in my inbox, the pieces were already in place. 23 of them, each one a calculated departure Madison never saw coming. On Monday morning, before most of the executive team had even finished their coffee, 23 resignation emails were sent simultaneously. Clean, formal, and irreversible. Department heads went into panic mode. Entire teams were suddenly leaderless. Code bases became inaccessible. Sprint's collapsed. Synergenics' engineering core didn't just take a hit. It was amputated, and that same Monday, at exactly 10 a.m., Nova Core Systems released a press statement that sent shockwaves through the entire sector. I was named as their new chief executive officer, effective immediately. Attached was a teaser demo of our new flagship product, built on aita, running faster and leaner than anything Synergenics had ever shipped. In 1 hour, we didn't just announce competition. We declared war. And Madison, still sitting in her office, surrounded by empty chairs and unread resignation letters, finally realized she hadn't just lost me. She'd lost everything. She showed up unannounced late in the evening, her hair a mess, heels uneven, mascara smudged just enough to betray that this wasn't a planned visit. For a second, I didn't even recognize her. Not because she looked different, but because the version of Madison standing outside my apartment that night wasn't the Madison I'd known for the last 9 years. This was someone stripped of control, rattled, desperate. She didn't wait for an invitation. The moment I opened the door, she pushed past me like the hallway was on fire, and planted herself in the middle of my living room like she had some unspoken right to the space. I didn't know where else to go, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound practiced. We need to talk. As partners. The irony of that word didn't even sting anymore. It just sounded hollow. I didn't say a word. I sat across from her in silence, arms folded, waiting. She started unraveling faster than I expected. Apologies spilled out of her in half-formed sentences. She admitted the affair. She tried to package it as something that got out of hand, a mistake she had intended to end before it escalated. As if the months of scheming, the emails, the false board narratives, and the surgical dismantling of my career had all just been a business misstep. She even tried to frame it that way. Said it wasn't personal, that she had to protect her position, and that Carter helped her navigate a transition she didn't know how to handle. Every word felt like watching someone rewrite a story while the original was still sitting in my hands. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I didn't give her the reaction she was clearly bracing for. The explosion, the breakdown, the flood of emotion she might have thought would prove I still cared. I sat there and let her talk herself into a corner, and when she finally stopped to breathe, eyes wide and searching, I gave her exactly what she never expected. Clarity. You want to fix this? I said, my voice even. Then here's how it goes. I told her there would be no reconciliation, no salvageable middle ground. The marriage was over, and I would be filing for divorce immediately. The split would be 50-50ths. Assets, equity, property, everything. No negotiations. And Carter? He would be terminated by end of week. Quietly. Permanently. His involvement would be erased from Synergenics, his name removed from all strategy documents, and his NDA would include a clause preventing him from speaking to the media under threat of legal action. If she refused, or delayed, or tried to maneuver around it in any way, I would release everything. The photos, the emails, the timeline, every piece of evidence that showed how she and Carter conspired to dismantle my role, destabilize the board, and hide their affair under the guise of corporate restructuring. I would make it all public, to investors, to clients, to the press. Synergenics would burn from the inside out, and her reputation would go with it. She stared at me, stunned, as if she couldn't believe I'd come with demands instead of desperation. But she knew I meant every word. She nodded slowly without protest, her voice barely above a whisper when she agreed. She had no choice. The morning after Novacore's public reveal, my inbox exploded. By noon, I had over 100 messages, media requests, former partners reaching out, ex-clients of Synergenics asking for consultations, and journalists digging for quotes on the shift everyone had felt coming, but no one had expected so precisely. We hadn't just announced a product. We had fired the first real shot in a war that had been quietly brewing beneath the surface of the tech sector for years. What made it sting wasn't just that it worked, it was that it was ready. Aita, the platform Madison buried because she didn't understand it, was now functional, tested, scalable, and live. And it was mine. Within 72 hours, Novacore's social presence quadrupled. Investors began cold calling us, not the other way around. Enterprise clients who had spent the last year locked in long-term contracts with Synergenics were now desperately seeking transition roadmaps. They didn't care about brand loyalty anymore. They cared about results. And we had something they could deploy immediately. A machine learning framework that could ingest live datasets, adapt in real time, and offer predictive output with over 94% accuracy in complex market simulations. Halia didn't just automate analytics. It made them smarter. Behind the scenes, Synergenics was unraveling. I watched their stock begin to slide on Tuesday. By Friday, it had dropped 18%. Not because of anything I said publicly, but because clients were speaking with their wallets. Contracts were pulled. Pilot programs were paused. There were rumors that one of their top-tier investors threatened to retract funding unless internal instability was addressed immediately. And in the middle of it all, Madison did exactly what I knew she would. She sacrificed Carter. The press release was laughably vague. Strategic restructuring, consultant contract concluded, and some hollow quote about Synergenics refocusing on its core innovation values. But industry insiders weren't fooled. They knew the inside story. They had heard whispers for months about the rift at the top. They knew the faces behind the fallout. And now they knew what caused it. Madison's ego, her obsession with control, her inability to separate ambition from paranoia. She didn't just lose me. She lit the match that burned down her own credibility. The same people who once praised her as a visionary were now watching the collapse with thinly veiled satisfaction. Meanwhile, at Nova Core, the mood was different. Focused, disciplined, energized. We weren't celebrating, not outwardly. We were building. Every engineer who had left Synergenics with me had been assigned to core components of the next Halia release. There were no politics in the room, no silos, no wasted hours. Just forward motion. It was the culture we had always dreamed of, but never quite managed to sustain at Synergenics. Not until now. Not until we were free from the very machine that tried to erase us. And for the first time in years, I felt the momentum again, that hum beneath the surface when a company isn't just surviving, but ascending. 3 months later, the numbers said everything. NovaCore wasn't just thriving, we were leading. Halia had been adopted across 3 major enterprise sectors, and our pilot program with the National Logistics Consortium was outperforming projections by almost 40%. Industry analysts began referring to us as the quiet disruption, the company that didn't posture or pander, but delivered results too sharp to ignore every metric, every headline. Every investor note confirmed it. We had taken the lead, and we weren't giving it back meanwhile. Synergenics unraveled in real time. What began as missed deadlines turned into lost contracts. Departments were gutted under the guise of lean restructuring, but everyone in the industry knew the truth. They couldn't keep up. Without Halia, without the 23 minds that had once fueled their innovation engine, Synergenics was left with nothing but optics and empty roadmaps. The layoffs started quietly, mostly senior engineers and systems leads, then moved to product managers, even some client-facing staff. Morale tanked. Their leadership remained silent, and Madison stopped appearing at press events altogether. As for Carter Reynolds, he disappeared. There were no announcements, no follow-ups. His LinkedIn profile went dark. No one knew where he landed, or if he had landed at all. I doubted he'd ever be hired in the industry again, not with a cloud of scandal hanging over his name. For all his strategic whispering, he backed the wrong ambition. And when Madison realized he was more liability than asset, she dropped him without hesitation. It was poetic in a way. He helped engineer my removal, only to be erased in turn, discarded by the very person he conspired with. That kind of collapse doesn't need applause. It's self-cleaning. Then, one night, she reached out. Madison. A single email, no subject line. Just a message sitting in my inbox like it had wandered there by mistake. It was short. Only 4 words. I'm sorry for everything. There was no plea for forgiveness, no justification, no spin. Just those words. Cold, flat, final. I read it once, then closed the tab. I didn't reply. What was there left to say? The version of me who might have answered, who needed closure or catharsis or some final dramatic confrontation, no longer existed. That man had died the moment she chose Carter over me, the moment she turned our company into a battlefield and thought I would go quietly. Now, I was someone else entirely. I had built something new, not just a company, but a version of myself that only betrayal could forge. One that was sharper, more focused, more deliberate. I didn't need revenge to feel whole. I didn't need public retribution or headlines that drag her name through the mud. I already had everything I wanted. The company, the freedom, the clarity. Success isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet hum of knowing you won, and that the people who try to bury you are the ones now choking on the dirt.